He never let that go, but he also respected the national identity of Egypt. So essentially, a successful country is one that succeeds to put its foot down as to how to act foreigners when you're in our country, but without being draconian, without being excessive and exertive of your own, especially religious ideology. If you will award people a freedom of their own religion, but within reason, because at the end of the day, the paramount religion will always be, I guess, the religion of the country and also the identity of the country. That is always what's going to be paramount and take precedence above you. But you as a foreigner, you can be who you want to be insofar as you don't step on the cultural toes of my country. And if you have got skills to give, if you've got skills to award, if you can improve my country in any way, why would I say no to Joseph? He's the only one that can interpret dreams. Why would I say no to Joseph? He's the only one with good ideas about what to do pertaining the impending famine in the general region. Who says no to Daniel when he was the best administrator in the administration of King Darius, and of course, one of the baddest advisors, the most impressive advisors of King Nebuchadnezzar in the days of Nebuchadnezzar? Respect the culture of the country that you're in, and that country does well to put its foot down pertaining its own culture, but it also does best to embrace foreigners and their ideas insofar as, like I said, don't step on my cultural toes, and don't step on my language, and don't step on my laws. And I will let you be a Hebrew as a Hebrew. I will let you be a Christian as a Christian. I will let you be a Muslim as a Muslim, a Hindu as a Hindu. I will give you freedom of religion. So essentially what I'm trying to get at is that the most successful countries that have come and gone, that have raised up from the ground and become big empires that became first world and maybe even superpowers of their time, they were always tolerant of other religions, and the foreigners from among them were treated well, even though they might have come into that particular region with conquest. Once the people were captured, that's why Babylon was allowed to thrive for a season after Nebuchadnezzar captured the Hebrews. What do you call this thing? Once you have captured them, once you have essentially couped, if a coup is what happens, once the conquering has happened and the war has been won by whatever side, the side that wins, it'll succeed with its win. Insofar as the foreigners that have been essentially the not war criminals, but the war prisoners, if at all the war prisoners like Jehoiakim in Babylon are then after that treated well, if the slaves are fed, if they're allowed to build their own houses and maintain their religion, but don't step on my Babylonian toes, they will thrive. And God awarded prosperity to Babylon because it was good to Daniel, to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. However, having initially done what? Disrespected the religion of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar he got a bright idea to hook up a big statue in the center of his town, and upon certain music being played, people were not supposed to worship. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of course, wouldn't buy it. And so Nebuchadnezzar was met with the fate of seeing the fourth man in the fire and his own soldiers dying. And then, thank God, he learned a lesson and did not insist again that they do this thing. And after that, promoted the men. And what happened? His Babylon thrived. Similarly, too, he was going to kill all the wise men of Babylon because he had a frazzling dream that he couldn't remember. And these wise men could not figure it out until he sent a decree to kill all of them. But then Daniel caught wind of this, seeing as he was among the wise men, because they chose that's the thing, like what makes a country thrive. You see, these wise kings of history, these very strategic, intelligent kings of history have gotten one thing right. Nebuchadnezzar went and took the cream of the crop of Judah and put them in his service. That's why Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in his service, and Daniel. He took the best of the best. He took their nobility. He took their kings, but he didn't kill them. He took their kings, but he didn't kill them, and then used their services. And it came in handy in that they became foreigners in his country, exiles, if you will. But what happened with them in Babylon? Just like South African exiles in other parts of Africa, during the days of apartheid, they were educated. They were given education. They were loved. They were fed, and their ideas were embraced, and they helped to embetter the economic state of that country. And then they came back home and blessed the country with the gifts they acquired in foreign lands because they were given leg room to thrive, to grow, to beef up. Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing. He was smart enough to understand that we're not going to do what the Assyrian Empire did. That's why it fell. You indeed can, with just an iron fist, try to handle foreigners or nations about you that you conquer. But iron fists always get overwhelmed by the wrath of God, because he lives, right? God exists. So God will always raise up a structure that fights too much of a tyrant, and the Assyrian Empire was brutal. It was violent. It prided itself in displaying the impaled heads of defeated peoples. The Assyrian Empire, who were the first empire to overwhelm Israel, the northern part, the 10 tribes that split from, is it Rehoboam? Yeah, in favor of Jeroboam. Rehoboam, of which was the son of Solomon, because of the sins of Solomon and in his insincerity towards God. God gave the kingdom to Jeroboam, Jeroboam of which was not of royal lineage, but he was given the kingdom, and if at all he had honored the Lord would have honored him. And so taking the 10 tribes, but like he built up golden calves. He created a new religion and dishonored God. And the Assyrian Empire was used as the axe on the tree. And God was the one who swung it, right? The Assyrian Empire was the axe on the tree of which left a stump. That was the northern tribes, made up of 10 tribes of Israel. Do you understand? And only Benjamin and Judah stayed with Rehoboam, and they were left. And they thrived for a little minute because their kings were a little bit more righteous, though not all the time. They made mistakes, and so they ultimately fell. But because God would never ever allow for the comprehensive dissolution of his people, because after all, is he not gathering for himself a people for his own possession? The judgment that came on Judah for their indiscretion and their idolatry was far lighter in measure than that which came on Israel for their exorbitant idolatry. As a result of the brand spanking new religion that Jeroboam started, and the Assyrian Empire prided themselves. Why did they fall? Why did the Assyrian Empire ultimately fall apart? Even though it was the axe on the tree that the Lord used as a vessel of judgment on Israel for those golden calves, for that false religion, for all that idolatry, for their Ahab, for their Jeroboam, for their crazy kings. What did God allow? He allowed the scattering of his people. God allowed for the scattering of his people, but right now we are talking about the fall of the Assyrian Empire. I'm trying to help you understand what makes kingdoms fall. The fall of the Assyrian Empire. Violence, intolerance, arrogance, bloodthirst, draconian iron fist, siege engines that leave no room for negotiation, and pride in carnage, and absolute disregard and dissolution of national identity and religion of captured peoples. The Assyrian Empire's strategy was always to destroy the identity of the peoples that they beleaguered, right next to no regard at all for their religion. They insisted on mixing peoples together so they would forget their identity, because they understood that unity, there is strength in unity. And so if you can disunify them by even fracturing their religion, you have succeeded. Like kings that have done that have whole scale systematically tried to destroy religions of the countries that they came into and took over, their countries always fall. And wise kings, whether it be by osmosis from the sky, so essentially the providence of God just giving a good idea to albeit a pagan king, or by study of history, as in look at canons, look at the world that has come and gone, where in successful empires, what did they get right? So if at all a new king researches kingdoms that stood strong for centuries, they came to find one common thread, and this common thread tended to be respect for the culture of those people, and especially their religion. If upon being your servants now paying you tribute as a king, and pleading their allegiance to you as a king, if you in that state allow them a freedom of religion, a freedom of also what their national identity, who they regard themselves to be, if you leave them in that state, but of course put your foot down as to what you expect from them, being your subordinates now, your subservience now, if you do that, your kingdom will thrive, because people then can live at relative peace in the season. Right? And Nebuchadnezzar, by the amazing grace of God, kind of knew that. And I think that Nebuchadnezzar's strategy, and also the strategies of the up-and-coming kings of Babylon, was like Darius, for instance. I think what inspired that thought process on how to deal with the exiles after their siege engines succeeded to cause the fall of Judah, it might have been looking at the Assyrian model and what ultimately caused it to fall apart. The Assyrian model didn't work because they were tyrants, and when they finally passed away, when they finally died as a country, when they were finally brought low by their own river Tigris as a result of a judgment coming to pass from God by the prophet Nahum, when the prophecy was fulfilled, likely what happened, King Nebuchadnezzar, in his brains over there, was they were full of carnage, murder. They didn't take prisoners. They flayed people and they impaled their heads, and they used their skins, displayed, and they used fear, displayed at public squares, at the entrance of cities. And this model worked for so long. But herein lies the mighty Assyrian Empire, not come up for air. Herein lies the mighty Assyrian Empire fall, in spite of how it at some point looked like it could never fall. So Nebuchadnezzar was likely like, okay, what can I do differently to ascertain that surrounding nations will not pride themselves in my destruction as a country? What can I do to ascertain that surrounding nations do not co-ally to bring me low. I am presently the reigning theme and I'm strong. But how do I ascertain that surrounding regions that I conquer do not come together as these small little countries and succeed to become big enough to overwhelm me, tolerate their culture, tolerate their religion? They must pay tribute to me and they will be left to do their own thing. I will put my own officials in their cities. I will put my own officials in their countries and they will respect my laws, and my own governors will essentially make sure that they don't fall apart, and I will assign their own people in positions of honor to report back to me. And if they can just respect that, they'll be left alone. If it wasn't for, is it Zedekiah? Yeah, I think it was Zedekiah. If it wasn't for Zedekiah of whom was the Hebrew king that I think replaced Jehoiakim, right? That was put there by Nebuchadnezzar. If he did not decide to ally with Egypt at the expense of Babylon, the siege on Judah that finally came, that the prophet Jeremiah prophesied, would not have come. They would not have ended up eating their own children after being sieged for 3 years. They would not have all been taken to exile. They would not have had their temple destroyed. And also they would not have had goods in the temple taken and sent to Babylon. So their temple would not have been desecrated. They would not have endured what they endured if only people had respected the king, Nebuchadnezzar. He would have just let them be, and they would have been successful insofar as they just respected he who conquered them, if you will. And that's why Babylon succeeded. They were unreasonable. The prophet Jeremiah, if anything, the prophet Habakkuk was lamenting about injustice in the land, you will remember. And he just could not understand what in the world is going on. Why do the wicked prosper? And the core lament was because of the wickedness inside his own land, but also the Assyrian Empire that was wreaking havoc in these people's lives. And God told Habakkuk that I am going to judge Assyria through Babylon. And Habakkuk just couldn't get it. He felt like, how are you going to use an evil kingdom to destroy another evil kingdom? Ultimately, in the end, he said, though you slay me, yet I will always praise you. And ultimately, in the end, he got the point. He understood what God was doing. Remember I said that the Assyrian Empire was the axe that was honed and used to cut down Israel. They're evil. They were God's vessel to chop, in the book of Micah. Is it Micah? I stand corrected. There is a scripture there where the Lord is rebuking, it could be Micah or Amos, I stand corrected, where God is rebuking the Assyrian Empire. No, it was not the Assyrian Empire. What was the other one? Sidon. Yes, thank you. Sidon. No, well, there was a Sidon or Tyre. It was either the king of Sidon or Tyre. Either it was the king of Sidon and Tyre. I'm confusing the two, but I think it might actually be Tyre. I stand corrected, right? He was saying to Sidon at the time, who was very strong, or Tyre. Let's just say Sidon. No, let's say Tyre. Or let's say Sidon and Tyre. But I know it's not both of them, okay? He was saying to them, don't pride yourself. And I think it's in Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel. And I think it's in Ezekiel 5. Again, I stand corrected. He was saying to them, do not pride yourself in being strong. Who's the one that saw the Lord seated on a throne? It was Isaiah. It was Isaiah. I'm sorry, I'm going around beating around the bush all over the show, but ultimately I'm getting to a point. You know that scripture in the Bible 6, yes, it is definitely Isaiah 6. The king of Sidon is used to also describe how pompous and arrogant the devil was. I will exalt myself above the stars of heaven. Like in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne high and lifted up. And then he describes the seraphim over there. And then he goes on to speak about the devil who's like, I will exalt myself above the stars of heaven and I will be like God. That king thought he was so supreme. He thought he was untouchable, like he was MC Hammer, because he had amassed for himself so much wealth by his sheer philosophical talent. He was intelligent. He was successful in all of his feats and feared. Do you understand? And there was a lament against that king of, I think it's Sidon. I'd have to go in the Bible to correct which country it is exactly. But really, I'm not going in the Bible right now. Y'all do the mathematics, y'all do the research, please. It's one of the two definitely that I'm speaking about. He says to them how, and I think it is through in this particular state, the prophet, it is through one of the minor prophets. It could be Micah, but I stand corrected. That pomp and that arrogance of the king of Sidon or Tyre or whatever, the Lord says to them, how can you say that you're great and you've done it against all these nations that you've conquered how can the axe say I'm impressive and I'm excellent against the tree and have no regard for the one who swung it? The tree was honed by the axe and the one who swung it. How in the world can you pride yourself in being the axe when you're not even the guy who swung the axe? I am the guy who swung the axe. I'm the lumberjack. You are the axe. And Israel is the tree. So I used you to judge my people. So therefore do not pride yourself in your prosperity above my people, because I am the one that swung you, right? That is a similar thing here that I'm trying to allude to. When people have no regard for the one who swung them in order to bring down another structure, God always brings them low. And he did that with Nebuchadnezzar because the guy was in and out of sobriety. He ultimately died in sobriety. I believe Nebuchadnezzar is in heaven. But was he not of the imagination that he has built this Babylon all by himself because he was given wisdom? Was Nebuchadnezzar really given wisdom? By his sheer academic volition, by his sheer curiosity, and upon careful study then happened upon excellent military strategies? No. Nebuchadnezzar, even the Lord calls him his anointed, just as he called Cyrus his anointed. Herein lies pagan kings being called the anointed of God, chosen from eternity past to be awarded a particular wisdom in order to deal with a people surrounding, including God's own people, that civilizations might not be depleted by the sheer rapacity of crazy kings and megalomaniacal streak that makes them want to rule everything with an iron fist, mean-spirited, cold, full of carnage, full of murder, having no regard for the humanity of the nations that they conquered, until the world is left with nothing but Assyrian-type personalities for countries. Nobody can survive a nation that violent, that brutal. And then out here making like cannibals eating the whole earth. So Nebuchadnezzar, look very carefully at what brought you to this posture, this position, fluffing your plumage like a peacock. What brought you to that terrace until you can say, look at me, this Babylon that I have built? First and foremost, you were made to make an observation from the time you were but a little boy, growing up as royalty of this horrific monster called, you were given understanding of this horrific monster called Assyria. They were a fearsome force to be reckoned with in your region. They were a problem for every surrounding country. They were monstrous. And you also watched them fall and be given on a silver platter that whole empire because a supernatural force helped you come at this fortified city. Nature helped you. You did not conquer Assyria in your own might. You obviously didn't. You were conveniently helped along after beleaguering Assyria with, I used to say Egypt, but I'm pretty sure it's not Egypt, it's another country. Babylon made a decision to ally with another country to come up against Assyria because Assyria, had to fall. It was violent. I've explained how they impaled people's heads, used their skins, used fear to reign. And Nebuchadnezzar and co, his allies, who are coming up against Assyria, because listen, this kingdom has got to fall. They were helped by nature. So herein lies God showing Nebuchadnezzar, nature coming against your enemy, that you might take your enemy. The Assyrian Empire was destroyed by the river Tigris. And because of the flooding that happened in the land over there, plundering, looting, and essentially ascertaining the flattened, maintained state of that empire was successfully achieved by the siege engine of Babylon, until ultimately then Babylon became the power of the time. And what then did Nebuchadnezzar do? He made a decision based on the observation of the way of running of the based on the executive personality of Assyria. Made a decision that I'm not going to be like him. Nebuchadnezzar was like, I'm not going to be like that. It's like a president coming in to a country after a tyrant that ran it for much too long, that would not be dethroned, that would not allow dethroning, and the president-elect of the opposition fighting for years to set free, reprieve a people from tyranny, and based on the observation of how the other person ran the show, then making a decision that I'm going to be entirely different. It, frankly, I think is what's happening in Iran today. Apparently, the crown prince's father, the crown prince Reza Pahlavi's dad, so the previous crown prince, was also kind of despotic in his own way. Listen, I would have to get into deeper historical study to find out exactly in what fashion, and I'm not trying to do any of that right now. I'm just trying to get a biblical point across. And Reza Pahlavi is his son, was his son, and the next in line crown prince. Now Iran is going through a revolution and we don't know when it's going to end. Things are dragging their feet through the mud, and that's another story for another day. I don't have the energy to speak about that today. But what is the vantage point that Reza Pahlavi has taken? He has refused to be like his dad. He has rather posited the idea of a secular democracy if he comes into power, and a transitional one where he's not going to lodge himself as a monarch, but rather to enable through a transitional government that the people might vote for their leader. And this is inspired by the failed model of his father. People being happy to give him a chance, seeing as he is obviously the dynasty. A lesser evil is obviously. It's lesser an evil than the Iranian regime. But it's not enough, I guess, according to Reza Pahlavi, to be a mere lesser evil. It's not enough to be just better than the Iranian regime. You learn from the mistakes even of the fallen dynasty that you are the son of. So essentially he's much like a King Josiah that came from Manasseh and Ammon or whatever. Though his dad, I can't really say was like Manasseh. That would be too extreme a description. because Manasseh was just wicked, right? But it's like a child coming up, making observations of the status quo and making a completely different decision as to how he's going to like take things going forward, all right? And so based on the model of his dad, he has chosen not to be his father's son. And based on the model of the Iranian regime, he has chosen not to be the Iranian regime. So where were the errors of his father? Essentially a monarchy that is somewhat kind of despotic, but it was far better than the Iranian regime. But it's not enough to be a lesser evil like the monarch. So get off the throne of monarchy and facilitate a transitional government. And of course, you're not going to shove Islam down anybody's throat, and neither their ideology. You're not going to maintain the current oppression because people want a different thing. So who has given Reza Pahlavi wisdom for a secular democracy and a transitional government that is going to cause people to... Who has awarded Reza Pahlavi the wisdom for a secular government and a transitional government, a secular democracy and a transitional government that is going to facilitate for the voting of their leadership that they want in the future? And so essentially, likely erect another Iranian president. I found out the other day that Pezeshkian quit. At least he's not dead, because everybody be out here dying over there, aren't they? Anyway, all right, he got that. Where did he get the wisdom? Of course, like he didn't just wake up one day and be like, it just makes all sense under heaven. This is how things should go. He made an observation of the era of previous monarch and previous despot and said, I'm gonna do differently because what do the people want? So was he then on that day, is Reza Pahlavi, for instance, quote unquote, if he were to end up being what it is that is anticipated he might be for Iran, can he really say, if at all he succeeds with a secular government, if at all after the regime, the revolution happens, this becomes the eventuality? And by the time you see this video, maybe something might have fruition eventually over there. I'm speaking right now as of the 13th of June, and there is still a scuffle in Iran. So we don't know what's going to be the case, the status quo, by the time I share this content. But can Reza Pahlavi, should we hypothetically look into a future where this here has succeeded to be a thing, can he then chill on a terrace and be like, look at my Persia? Hey, can he say, look at my Persia, I have built it, I'm so wise, I came up with the bright idea to get over the dynasty and rather come up with a secular democracy? The dynasty will likely proliferate forth, much like what happened in the United Kingdom. There is a kingdom there, but there's also government. And we all know the fires that have been getting fought over there, clutch for power between the two structures, especially pertaining the Church of England and what is allowable to be taught over there versus not, who are non-conformist and who are conformist. And remember how, as a result of this tug of war between government and the kingdom, how these tugs of war at some points, in some parts, gave non-conformists freedom of religion to preach, and in other parts, because these two legs were fighting, refused to give freedom to the non-conformists. And so they were arrestable for simply giving the gospel because they were not adhering to what was the allowable gospel to preach by the Church of England. Like men like Matthew Henry and John Bunyan at different spots in their ministries were free to preach and not, because of the government and the monarchy at different times just being at odds and coming up with different laws depending on who was more powerful. So ultimately, however, what has happened, and we now see it today, Monaco, England, is that the monarchy and the government, at least on paper, don't have the right to interrupt or interfere in anybody's freedom of religion, no matter who comes into power and who is stronger at any given time. People on the ground are left alone with their religion. So even if King Charles goes awry and starts to speak smack on behalf of Islam in his nation that was built by Christianity, it becomes irrelevant. People can riot on the streets and complain, but nobody is chilling in the band of nonconformists anymore, because the Church of England is not out here dictating what people can preach at pulpits based on what either the monarchy has to say, given that it's now more influential today, or the government. So in Iran, there stands to be a structure of that nature where there is likely a kingdom operating monarchy right next to a secular government. And if they learn any lessons from the United Kingdom, they will know that if you fight over here for power, let's say Reza Pahlavi lives another 40 years and Iran has peace for those 40 years, maybe they vote him in as president or whatever, I don't know, like something gives, and then in his era, in his reign, in his season of living out the rest of his life, he's favored, and so it's peaceful in Iran. When then he goes out of power, then some other people rise to the forefront and are like, no, let's bring back the monarchy as the core power in the country that's going to then low-key dictate to the people what needs to happen. And then the government is like, no, we all voted for our rights, democracy, this is what's rather giving. And they clank swords. They're going to endure citizens on the ground through exactly what happened in the United Kingdom. Sometimes John Bunyan is in prison, other times he's not. Sometimes Matthew Henry is in prison, sometimes he's not. Sometimes there's something, because it depends on which political structure or dynastic structure is more beefy for the minute. So I guess kings learn lessons by indeed reading up on a nation that has got a dual monarchy and a parliament. What has been the most successful season of peace lingered in the country? The status quo over there, what was it? So countries with both kingdoms and governments investigate the span of history, the time that was most peaceful. What did affairs on the ground look like religiously? What did affairs on the ground look like just in terms of freedoms? And whatever it is that you can make an observation of, then that be that which you premise your own strategy on. You want peace. People have come out of revolution. Blood has been shed. Kids died. We can't afford to clank swords and be at odds in a nation that has got those dual structures of governance. Let's rather just learn from the mistakes of England. Learn from the mistakes of England and not do them so that we can walk in the rather season of peace instead of striving to ultimately achieve the peace. Because war destroys careers. War destroys families. War takes away peace, and war destroys countries. It destroys infrastructure. So let's just rather, why can't we all just get along? Let's just get along. But you know, there's always going to be somebody disturbing peace eventually, even after a season of getting along, because that's just the nature of man. God has not come upon the earth to bring peace but a sword. So therefore people will always disturb the peace. Once it has been established, there's always going to be a disturber of peace. The Bible says that the wicked are like the tossing sea whose waters bring up mire and dirt continually. There is no rest, thus saith the Lord, for the wicked. So even when a country has got a season of peace, there will always be a peace destroyer. There will be somebody that just rocks up and functions as that fly around your nose that's going to make you unable to sit still anymore. But praise the Lord for seasons of peace. And Nebuchadnezzar could either just continue to clank swords and fight and have people hate him so much that when he dies and when his kingdom dies, no one misses him. You know how that was spoken about Assyria? Everybody around was glad. Nobody was dismayed by the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Everybody was thoroughly celebrating because the guys were so violent. They were full of carnage. Okay? Can Reza Pahlavi, in returning back to that analogy, once he succeeds to do what he wants to do in Iran, can he preen himself like a peacock on a terrace and say, I'm so smart, I'm so wise, I single-handedly with my sheer intelligence just knew by sucking it out of my finger what to do and what not to do? Can he reasonably say that without being evidently arrogant? No, you got your wisdom from the wind blowing it in your direction through observation. That's where you got your wisdom. You got wisdom from observing your dad. You got wisdom from observing the regime that was toppled over. And if you're studious enough, you might have even gained wisdom from dually governed countries like the UK, where there is both a monarchy and a government. You got your wisdom from there. You read up on, I believe Denmark is also like that. You got your wisdom from looking at countries that still have monarchs, however, also with a functioning government. And you saw why they have peace for years. And what is the common thread across them all? Freedom of religion. Freedom for people to be culturally who they want to be. Love of the foreigner from among you, but also putting down of your foot as to how the foreigner must act in your borders. The moment you disregard your own culture in favor of the foreigner's culture, you're committing the mistake that God was perpetually warning his people against committing. He said, love the foreigner from among you, treat the foreigner from among you well. But one thing he also said was, the foreigner that lives among you, you don't eat at their houses, because there is a whole procedure that you have to go through, and it's quite onerous, to make sure that food is edible up in your household. It has to be kosher. You have to cook meat a particular way. Vessels that are unclean. And also, there's a certain way of washing dishes, certain way of preparing food. And that's why you can't just visit your foreigner friend and go eat over there, because they don't do the same things that you do. And also, you can invite the foreigner into your house to eat with you insofar as they honor your customs, so you can proselytize the foreigner. But you cannot join their wagon. You can bring them into your culture and teach them your culture and your ways and your God. And so on that day, they can eat with you. But you don't go to their house and eat there. I guess maybe that's why there's so much anti-Semitism across the world. Jews can't just eat anywhere, especially when they're orthodox and very serious. Respect their rights, respect their religion, because there's quite a lot that goes into preparing Jewish food. And I understand, because God is the one that gave them those commandments, and they have yet to embrace their Messiah. So in the same way that Islam is yet to embrace Jesus, we don't get to shove we don't get to shove pork down their throats if they don't want it. So if at all you're going to feed your Muslim friend who has visited you for the school holidays bacon and eggs, and they don't want to eat, they're not being disrespectful to your mom who's made it that beautiful breakfast in the morning. They're Muslim, so they must either bring their own food or not sleep over anymore at the house of their non-Muslim friend. On that day, you don't acknowledge the God of the Muslims. On that day, it's not like you're acknowledging the God of the Muslims as a Christian family or an atheist family and making their God your own. You're just you're respecting their religion, and you're also respecting their culture. But in your house, insofar as they don't step on your toes and try to force you to never eat pork and try to force you to pray however many millions of times a day, On that day, they're just flat out disrespectful. When they try to convert you to Islam and you say no, and then they get hostile, and then they want to do jihad in your house, that's when they're just overreaching and they're doing too much. And that's when they need to be severely disciplined. And what is the word that I'm looking for? Deported. That's when you must deport them from your house. Deport the monster from your house. Kick them out like a soccer ball because they have no respect for your customs while you had respect for theirs. It is possible to live at peace with your fellow man. That's why in the Bible it is written that if it is possible, strive to live at peace with your fellow man, insofar as it depends on you. So you respect the Muslim and their culture by, if you know, not feeding them pork when they come to your house, or allowing them, if they want, to pack their own lunch and their own food when they're sleeping over at your house because they need it to be halal. But you don't bring yourself down to their level and their God by cooking all your meals halal in the interest of respecting Muslim rules and traditions because you've got a guest now of honor in your house. No, you don't break down the walls of your house in order to accommodate a foreigner because they prefer a particular type of mortar to build the house. You tell them, this is our mortar that we live in, and we understand that you want to bring your own halal food here. You can do that. We will refrigerate it, and we will even follow whatever specifications of refrigeration and preparation. You can even come into the kitchen and prepare it yourself. When you're visiting my daughter for like a week on school holiday or whatever, we'll respect that. But you don't get to convert my daughter to Islam if she doesn't want to. Though you have a right to try and proselytize her for your faith, for your religion. But since I'm a Christian parent, I trust and I hope that my daughter will, in her own freedoms, reject your God gently and just say, listen, I'm Christian, I'm sticking to my story, and I can't eat the food that you have brought here to prepare because I don't want to eat food sacrificed to idols, unlike South Africa that is shoving halal food down everybody's throat. But I will respect you as you eat your own separate food. And as you want to break away from all of us for however many times a day to go and pray, I'll respect you as my friend. But you don't get to break down the bricks of my house, of my family, as a Muslim, with your Islamic agenda. On that day, we're going to deport you from the house, otherwise known as a whole entire country. On that day, you're going to leave, you're going to bounce, you're going to step. On that day, you're going to skedaddle like you ain't Jack. Because who do you think you are, right? That's kings like those are awarded. Kings who get that are ones who say, I'll collect a tribute from you and let you keep your language. Make sure that your children continue to grow up learning Hebrew or whatever. I won't insist that you learn Greek. Insofar as you pay tribute to me, insofar as you respect national infrastructure, we will respect your temple. But nonetheless, this here in totality is a Greek empire. So the CI of your houses will be Grecian. You're this, and then listen, you are going to follow, they're going to be Hellenistic, but, and you're going to pay Jews taxes to the empire. But you can keep your religion in a bunch and your language in a bunch if you're strong enough. That's the thing. That's the stealth of wise kings. They say, keep your religion, keep your culture. Pay me tribute, respect my country and the fact that I'm boss. But if you're strong enough to resist Hellenistic culture, then I guess you get to stay a Hebrew of Hebrews. But watch how influential my people are going to be to make your sons partake in Greek Olympics, butt naked, defiling themselves with these practices that are so improper and so immodest as Jews. Nobody made them do it. Nobody shoved it down their throat. But Greek culture was so enticing to the Jews, to the Hebrews, that they couldn't help but do it. So a wise king essentially stumbles people that are not rooted in their culture and in their religion by stealth. And when you stealthily win people over for your side, you're not going to get a war. You're not going to get a coup. You're not going to get a riot. You're only going to get people that are still Hebrews of Hebrews, Jews of Jews, wagging their head at the compromise of Hellenized Jews. They're going to break away and be set apart and separate from Hellenistic society and upset, but nonetheless unable to do anything about it because look at this person right there. Then on that day, that's how a king averts war. He averts war. However, also slowly but surely eroding at the fastly held beliefs of a foreign nation living among them, because the mindset of the Assyrian Empire was correct in that there is power in unity. And so if you can fracture what the people collectively believe in and steal away their sense of identity, you significantly reduce the likelihood of them regaining their strength. But you see, the way that the Assyrian Empire did it was violent, and it was through carnage and through deliberate attempts to completely destroy fastly held beliefs by people and threaten them if they should choose to maintain their own thing. Future kings come, they make an observation of this and say, how can I break down their unity? How can I fracture their unity, but without them knowing it? Pretty much what Alexander the Great did. I need the loo again. I'll be back. I'm back. Whew. So how do those countries that succeeded to be superpowers lose their national je ne sais quoi? How do superpowers lose their national je ne sais quoi? Either by being like the Assyrian Empire, just entirely ridiculous. So you're mean and you're terrible and everybody wants you destroyed. Therefore, you're a ticking time bomb and you're on the clock. Any minute from today, you're going to have to resign yourself from your duties. You're going to have to abdicate, bro man or sister girl. You're going to have to stop because no one likes you. Or you can allow for the fracturing of your national identity. You can allow for the destruction of your national identity. You can let it fall apart. Either way, you're falling. So a strong country that is maintained in strength is one that does not allow for the diminishing of their original national identity, but that, however, loves the foreigner. And in so loving the foreigner is also, however, firm on what is expected of the foreigner if they're going to be comfortable, if they're going to be at peace, and if they're going to be left alone to do their thing. Just make like Jews under King Alexander the Great, and you'll be okay. We'll leave you alone. So let's look at the Reza Pahlavi example. Can the guy, or analogy, metaphor, can the guy say, upon then employing this hypothetical situation, eventuality that I just spoke about, can he say, ooh, I'm so great because I'm smart. In my own unique capacity, I came up with these ideas all by me savvy? Or can the guy be accoladed with having made a wise decision based on informed collation of data? He got information from different parts, saw where people messed up and tweaked that, saw where they did well and cultivated that, and then came up with his own model. Therefore, his knowledge is the sum of other people's wisdoms and the subtraction of other people's follies. And then he comes up with his own idea. So therefore, who in the world gave a man like that wisdom? The one who raises up kings and brings them low, God. And he causes the next kings, the one who raises up kings and brings them low, and he causes the next kings that come into the party, if they have any wisdom at all and are not like Nabal or Abigail, to make informed decisions based on the data encircling them. So therefore, a new monarch, a new king, a newly appointed president, a new Kua wins his people over by simply not enduring them through a perpetuated harassment and abuse that caused his people to revolt against him. So if as a king you want to be loved, learn lessons from your predecessor and you will likely succeed to win the people over, because they tend to be taken over in a state of exhaustion. And if you can promise them, however well you keep that promise, some kind of semblance of rest, you do well. And so how do you promise a people that come into your kingdom as servants, as subservients, as subordinates, as subjects? How do you promise them rest? Essentially relieve them from whatever it is that oppressed them in the previous administration. Whether or not, like I said, you keep that promise is on you. And based on history, rarely ever do these new men and women that take on new reigns ever truly succeed to comprehensively award peace and rest, but they can be, by our fallible human standards, some kind of semblance of peace employed by a new king based on largely succeeding to keep promises to the people on the ground. So in this analogy, Reza Pahlavi would have succeeded to win this thing not of anything he has done, but of the wisdom of God, who raises up kings and brings them low, and gives wisdom even to pagan kings. God gives wisdom even to pagan kings for his own purposes. You know how it's written in God's word that for his servants that go through it in life, that the Lord has set apart everything for its purposes, including the wicked for the day of trouble. So a troublesome king has been raised up by God to be troublesome, that some purpose of God might be fulfilled. And a good king has been raised up as well for the same purpose, either delaying wrath and judgment or bringing restoration. Delaying wrath and judgment because God is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, not willing that anybody should perish but that all should come to knowledge of him. Or restoration because he is a magnanimous God that, albeit having judged his people at some point, restores them to prosperity, because time for the winepress of the wrath of God to out your overflow has come and gone. So now let's go back to the original question. What makes for a successful country? What, upon gazing at all of these the superpowers of the world, or kingdoms that have come and gone, what caused their nations to thrive until they became a superpower? And those that have fallen or have lost clout, what caused them to either fall or lose esteem? The thing that caused them to rise was in their power. They kept people with the freedom of expression and religion, but however putting their foot down on their own national identity. And what caused them to start falling, those that have fallen, because Greek fell, Greece, it fell. And the Roman Empire also fell. The British Empire, while it is still very strong, is nonetheless not as strong as it used to be. So it lost steam. And now today, America is not fallen. but it's losing steam. What caused the loss of steam or the fall altogether? In the spirit of tolerance, you forgot yourselves. In the spirit of tolerance, you forgot what made you strong. In the spirit of tolerance, you forgot your culture. You did not honor God's ways, observe his statutes to his people. In the Old Testament especially, where in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, there are so many laws there. And you might just read them on some, oh, thank God, we're no longer under the law. We're no longer under the law. So like so onerous. It's just so much to go through. But if you listen to those books carefully, there are some nuggets of wisdom you can gain here, even though you're no longer under the law. And you can see where God was coming from with that. And he told the Jews, don't eat with foreigners, though you can proselytize them, and once they're converted, they can come and eat in your household. Or when you're trying to give them the gospel, tantamount, or when you're trying to explain God to them, they can come eat in your house, but you can't eat in theirs. And if they're going to eat in your house, they have to partake in the ceremonial cleansings that you endure. So that's why it was so onerous even for foreigners to come and eat with Jews. They just had to go through so much. In order for them to not be regarded as unclean anymore or to sit at the same table as them, they had to go through rituals. So if a foreign girl or a foreign boy was willing to endure all those rituals, then the Jews would endure them through them before they could eat with the Jews. Otherwise, you don't get to even touch our food because frankly, you're like a leper. You can't chill in our camp. Right? The Lord told them, the foreigner from among you, don't be harsh. But one thing you cannot do. And so tolerating them and their religion, no. Tolerating that they have a different religion. You cannot mingle with them. You cannot eat with them. You can't marry them. And it's not about race. It's about allegiance. If that foreigner completely converts, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Thus saith Ruth, they're as good as any Jew. So you can marry them. Thus doeth Boaz. But for as long as they're maintained in their Moabite religions and practices, they're a foreigner among you. Treat them well. But they don't eat with you and you don't marry them. It's separatism. And that separatism is counseled by the Lord, and he says, be ye holy, for I am holy, be ye separate. Come out from her, my people, lest you should partake in her plagues. That separateness is a spiritual separateness that pleads allegiance to God, and not so much to race per se. And God awards culture. God awards culture. For instance, I am a Christian and I was born in South Africa with a certain culture, and this pre-existing culture within which I was born, I could no longer maintain when I came to Christ. In my culture, a heavily pregnant woman, for instance, cannot go to a funeral because it's a bad omen for the baby or whatever, based on what? Ancestral worshipping beliefs. So therefore, you'd be considered quite taboo as a black person to go to a funeral when you're 9 months pregnant, when you're 8 months pregnant.